Hi, dear friends. I'm here to talk about one of the directions that I mentioned previously as some of the directions in which that I want to explore as a coach, and having my background in philosophy, anthropology, and currently in mental health counseling. Um, and that direction is decluttering. I previously mentioned that I would love to explore the directions of unleashing creative potential, decluttering, breakup, and I think I didn't mention in that first video, but I wanted to do academia, academia and everything that is related to it. So it's a lot of different topics, as you can see, and I would love to focus on something in particular as soon as I understand which topic is more interesting to people, because I want it to be useful to others, not just a number of topics for myself to vent, so to say. So the topic of decluttering, I find very interesting. I've read Marie Kondo's books, and she mentioned one of her inspirations in one of those books, or maybe even in two of them. And that inspiration is Nagisa Tatsumi, The Art of Discarding. So this book also exists. I see that it's mirrored on the video, but you can trust me that that's The Art of Discarding. So I read that book too. And I find that it's very important for us to pay attention to what surrounds us day after day. What kind of objects we have, what kind of material world, what kind of materialities we surround ourselves with. And why it is important, because from the phenomenological perspective, what we see around us, it's kind of the objects that also act, right? They are also possessing some sort of power. They have the ability to imprint themselves upon our mind and elicit certain emotions. So it's different for you. It's going to be different if you're looking at the objects and you're like, oh my God, that reminds me of something that I don't even want to remember. That reminds me, that brings a host of memories that are not pleasant. For instance, you have the objects that would remind you how you bought them and you experienced the buyer's regret, or they would remind you of the people with whom you parted ways, or they just don't have any power to elicit any sort of emotional response from you. So you're just looking at them as a dead matter. Now, it is totally possible and fine to live your life surrounded by this kind of objects. But if you actually decide to reign in them and rule over them and have the objects around you that elicit some sort of different kind of emotional response from you, your life is going to be better. Your life is going to be filled with joy. Even this book, it has the subtitle, How to Get Rid of Clutter and Find Joy. That all has the goal of speaking in the practical language of lifting your life satisfaction level, of making your life more enjoyable, and also free space to create something. So decluttering is a counterintuitive work that we can do. Why is it counterintuitive? Because from the time immemorial, humans were rather prone to collecting things, right? Things always presented some sort of value. They always had some sort of value. You would invest time in buying things or in acquiring them various ways. You would typically hold on to those things, right? Like from the time immemorial, we mended stuff. We tried to extend the services of those objects that we have. Now, with the development of mass production, we received access to the number of things that previously people didn't have access to. Now, of course, it all depends on class, what kind of class you have, what kind of socioeconomic background you have. But generally speaking, the people in the contemporary world have access to much more than their peers in the same class, roughly, had, like, for instance, 100 years ago, or even 200 years ago. Right, so that's very counterintuitive for us to let some things go and to get rid of things as opposed to hold on to them. But if we do hold on to them, we are layered by stuff that might not bring us joy, right? And might even it might even take some of the energy that we have. For instance, why would people collect books? Well, you know, when you are having a library, but just by looking at it, you already begin having all those ideas about the content of these books. So it's extremely important to sort out and not have the things that are just occasionally there, or that you don't want to have the kind of thoughts related to them, to free space to get the stuff that would actually inspire you to move into the direction that you want. For instance, if you want to do creative writing, again, you would want to surround yourself with the beautiful works of art produced by creative writers. If you want to be a philosopher, you have to have, you know, a number of books by philosophers. You, of course, have to read them ideally, but we all know that, of course, people with the libraries know it better than anybody, that you don't actually read books in this sense, right? Even imagining the relationships with them, like looking at this constellation, already produces some sort of, you know, field, right? The charged field where you want to be. So, and of course, books is like a separate conversation, because also we don't have that we don't have that easy of an access to books in our contemporary world. Like books that are really important tend to be expensive. They, for instance, textbooks, right? But nevertheless, you do want to curate the space that you inhabit. You do want to curate the space that you inhabit, and you do want to surround yourself with the objects that serve you rather than the objects that don't serve you. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that we need to kind of figure out what clutter is, because not everything is clutter. And even if, you know, it's clutter for somebody, it might not be a clutter for somebody else. The thing is, decluttering is not necessarily bringing your interior to minimalism. It's, you know, I don't enjoy minimalism. I understand that minimalism has amazing qualities. I adore people who are able to keep their house in a minimalist way, like who can select those few objects that they really love and put them in there and enjoy them. But I'm not a minimalist myself. In fact, in terms of interiors, I would rather self-identify as a maximalist, but which means like layering of things, bringing in stuff that you really like putting some sort of excesses out there, you know, but that doesn't preclude decluttering. Maximalism doesn't have to mean clutter. I would say that clutter is something that stopped serving the purpose, in terms of it's just a dead matter that created some sort of agglomeration that is totally unusable. It's just a bunch of gray stuff over there that is like dissipating into some sort of noise. This is what you want to remove. And there's this philosopher, Jordan Peterson, who we can critique extensively and have every reason to critique, but also who is very popular, especially among the young men, as far as I understand. And he wrote this book, 12 Steps or something. I'm forgetting the title of the book. But he did have a very important point in there for young men in particular. Although again, it applies to young women just as well. Like, you have to keep your room in order, because the order in the outside, in your own room, in your own controlled space, in your own little space, is a condition of the order happening in your mind. Like, it's very difficult to think orderly, step by step, while you are surrounded by all sorts of things that distract you. So ideally, you would want to have a decluttered space for yourself. There's nothing like super difficult about it. It's just how it is. You just have to bring your world in order. And that's a very old human desire to bring the world into harmony, to organize the world, to bring it to the order, which is the opposite of disorder. You don't want to be you don't want your world to be in disorder. You want your world to be in order. So Marie Kondo in particular, she has a number of amazing actionable steps in her books that she describes. And she is doing basically what CBT is doing, cognitive behavior therapy, I think. Now, I'm not trying to practice the CBT here in this particular sense, but I would say that the premise of CBT theory is one. You take the thought and you begin analyzing it, and you begin kind of taking it apart. So what she did is for me, she did that work of unpacking all these wishes and desires to hold on to the stuff, and kind of destroying these arguments that we have been telling ourselves about keeping stuff. For instance, one of her tips is that, well, we tend to keep instructions to the appliances, instructions that we never use and that we never consult, because usually those appliances are pretty self understood. It's self-evident how to use them. So we can safely get rid of them, but we don't, because we think, oh, what if that one event happens in our lives when we would need to consult those instructions? But the event never comes and the instructions are still there. And sometimes, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe it's a little box of those, maybe it's two, maybe like it's three. They've been there from your grandfather, and they do not really present that much of an historic interest to themselves. They are kind of ephemera, and they're ephemera that no museum would even hold on to. The producers of those appliances, they still have all those instructions. Those instructions are accessible online. If nothing is accessible, you can call and ask them how this appliance is supposed to work. So there is really no need to keep those instructions, right? And her general idea is that, Marie Kondo's idea is that you don't have to kind of teach yourself a lot in terms of how to pack things. Like, the questions of storage are never gonna help with the clutter. If you organize your clutter, even ideally in those storages, that would still be gonna be a dead matter that is taking up your space, and it is taking up your time. So discarding is actually the answer. Getting rid is actually the answer. And parting with things is actually the answer. And sometimes, of course, it's difficult for us to part with things like, okay, we are throwing them away. So we are adding to the planet's burden of having all these things that the planet has to be reworking, I guess, somehow surviving under the burden of. So, we can just give them away for free to people who would need them and who would want them. Or we can even sell them if that's something really that has value and you're reluctant to get rid of it. Nowadays you can post it on Facebook Marketplace, you can post it on Mercari. I don't know. There are like tons of apps. You can probably even post it on your own Facebook page for your neighbors to come and pick, if they want. So there are no excuses for having clutter. And, if we should continue this conversation, but if you need any help with that, if you want to talk through some of those possessions, talk through how to do that, I'm open, and you can book a session with me. And I'm hoping that over time we will go into some other topics as well, and perhaps deepen our conversation too. But that is just something I wanted to put out there because I've been thinking these things about decluttering. And I'm hoping to see you in the next video. You have a wonderful day.